I've been driving for 2 hours to the Marriott in Baltimore, where my wife is attending a conference. The plan was to surprise her by stopping by and taking her away for dinner. But this is just a plan. For the past 3 months, I have suspected that my wife, Megan, is dating someone among her colleagues. Every time she goes on business trips, trainings, or conferences, she always returns later than expected. I intend to catch her red-handed tonight and put an end to everything. Megan and I have been married for 14 years, and we have two beautiful children, 12-year-old Sarah and 10-year-old Todd, who now live with my mother. We got married right after school, after 2 years of dating. Megan, with her long brown hair, slender figure, and striking features, has always been cheerful. Until about 3 months ago, I thought we had a strong marriage, but some little things began to cause me concern. I hesitate to go straight into it and start a conversation, afraid that I will look paranoid or jealous. The conference is not far away today, so I had the opportunity to drop in unexpectedly and perhaps catch her in the hot seat. When I checked in at the hotel, I handed in my jacket and introduced myself as Phil Jenkins. My wife Megan is at an insurance conference in room 214 and informed me that I can pick up the key there. After checking my identity, the clerk handed me the key, and I nervously headed for the elevator. There were questions in my head: what to do when I find her, how to approach the situation, knock or enter, and whether she will be alone with a secure lock on the door. On the way out in the hallway, I decided to use the key and open the door to see what would happen next. Trying to be quiet, I opened the door, saw Megan at the table with an open briefcase, doing paperwork. She turned around in amazement and surprise at my unexpected appearance. I explained that I had free time and decided to drop by to take her out to dinner. Megan welcomed the idea and assumed that I would stay the night, expressing a desire to spend time together. She came over and kissed me. Realizing that my plan to catch her with another had gone to waste, I jokingly asked about a quick fun before dinner. Megan offered a carnal start before her shower, promising a night with what I went after. Feeling relieved that my suspicions turned out to be unfounded, I am glad that I have not lost the woman I love. We enjoyed a short carnal session, and with a big smile, Megan headed to the bathroom to take a shower. I packed up and sat down on the bed. Megan's makeup bag was on the dresser, prompting me to check for aspirin to relieve a headache from a long trip. I didn't find any pills, but something unusual in the side pocket caught my attention. Slowly, I took out a pack of 6 contraceptives from my briefcase, holding them in my hand while sitting on the bed. After Todd was born, Megan switched to birth control pills, which make her feel sick, and so I had a vasectomy. Since then, we have not used contraception, rejoicing in the freedom from contraceptives or pills. And now the question arose: why are these contraceptives in her makeup bag? I'm not stupid. Quickly concluding that my gorgeous wife was really cheating, I was unsure what to do next. Climbing into her suitcase, I found spare safety buttons for clothes. Taking one, I carefully poked a hole through each contraceptive, replacing them as I found them. While Megan was in the shower, I contacted a friend at home. I told Freddie that I needed his help, and he agreed without hesitation. I asked him to wait for about an hour and then call me on my cell phone, saying that a pipe had burst at school and I needed to return urgently. I assured him that he only needed to call, as I would take care of the rest. Freddie accepted the plan and promised to call around 7. Having decided that I did not want to spend the night with my wife, I regretted my past actions and wanted to avoid further complications. I thought about it on the way home, realizing that I needed to do something, although I wasn't sure what exactly. When Megan got out of the shower, I tried to restrain myself so as not to run into her, but inside I was burning with a desire to take revenge on the woman who was my wife. I'm not a violent person. I usually keep my anger under control. I realized that it was better not to let her know about my awareness of her infidelity. By the time we got to the restaurant, I was very depressed. I suggested Megan order whatever she wants, since it's on me. She replied that she was not very hungry and decided to take a small fillet, offering a bottle of rose wine to go with it. After placing the order, I couldn't resist asking a few provocative questions. I inquired about Megan's happiness in our marriage, and she responded positively. She mentioned the comfort of our home, our 2 wonderful children, and my loving presence, stating that she couldn't ask for more. Although I occasionally doubted if I was doing enough to keep her happy, I expressed my gratitude for having such an amazing wife, and how fortunate I felt. Megan reassured me, affectionately calling me a silly goose and acknowledging that's why I had traveled all the way to see her. She believed that I had nothing to worry about, as she was content and believed I was doing everything right. She even added that a woman couldn't ask for a better husband. As we enjoyed our dinner and engaged in light conversation, my cell phone rang. Apologizing to Megan, I excused myself to answer the call in the lobby, making sure not to disturb other diners. After a few minutes, I returned and explained that my friend Freddie had informed me about a water pipe breaking at the school. I apologized again and mentioned that I had to go back as soon as possible, resulting in the cancellation of our planned night together. Megan's face showed a hint of disappointment, but I couldn't determine the authenticity of her emotions. It seemed as though it didn't matter to her whether I stayed or left, as she would face consequences either way. While I boarded the elevator, Kirk Langford disembarked and greeted Megan. A somewhat uneasy smile appeared on my face as I shook hands and exchanged pleasantries with Kirk. He mentioned that he had stopped by our room for supper, but received no answer. It was evident that Megan had spoken about me to Kirk, as he knew who I was. I explained my reason for coming down, but had to cut it short due to an emergency, all the while fighting the feeling of disapproval towards Kirk's presence in Megan's life. As the elevator ascended, I addressed the issue with Megan again, expressing my desire for her to quit her job and my discomfort with her working with Kirk. I emphasized how important this was to me, as we had discussed it before. Megan firmly responded that she had no intention of quitting, as she enjoyed her job and learned a lot from Kirk. She suggested that I needed to overcome my paranoia about both of them. After a quick kiss in the room, I gathered my belongings and head home. The entire journey was filled with thoughts of Kirk stopping by Megan's room after supper. By the time I reached home, I was filled with anguish. The actions of my wife had ignited a hatred within me. I wished I had the ability to catch cheating spouses, but I felt utterly clueless. What could I do? I couldn't even find a way to distance myself from her. Divorce was what I truly desired, but lacking substantial evidence left me defeated. My wife had been unfaithful, and I knew it, but I was unable to take any action. Determined not to endure it, I sought help. 2 days later, Megan returned home with a jubilant demeanor, further infuriating me. In a moment of frustration, I checked her bag and found one remaining contraceptive with a hole in it. The weekend brought the picnic organized by the Globe's insurance company, providing some amusement for our children. However, the day filled me with dread, suspecting that some of my colleagues were aware of the situation. I tried to keep a low profile, fearing crude jokes and feeling exposed. Maybe I was being overly paranoid, but I couldn't help it. Megan seemed to be enjoying herself, socializing with Kirk and others. Although there were no overtly intimate gestures between them, their closeness was undeniable. Being ignored by Megan suited me just fine. A woman named Janet Langford introduced herself and promptly recognized me as Phil Jenkins. She possessed an astonishing beauty that left me genuinely bewildered. While I held my wife in high regard and loved her deeply, Janet effortlessly resembled a pinup model with her long auburn hair and captivating blue eyes. Despite her petite stature, her flawless figure left me pondering why Kirk would stray from someone like her. After exchanging pleasantries, we agreed to find a quieter spot to talk. We settled on some benches by the lake, approximately 100 yards from the picnic area. I made it clear that I was willing to listen to whatever Janet wanted to discuss. She hesitated, struggling to bring up a delicate subject. Sensing her unease, I revealed that I had recently discovered the affair myself. Janet seemed relieved and shared that she had known about it for approximately 2 months. She explained her plans to serve divorce papers and revealed that she had hired a detective to gather evidence. Her lawyer had advised that Megan's willingness to testify or sign a notarized statement about the affair would strengthen her case. Curiosity led me to inquire about the type of evidence Janet had, and she mentioned having photographs and recorded phone conversations. Though she didn't have videos yet, she believed the photographs alone were compelling. Janet showed me her evidence and expressed her appreciation for any assistance I could provide. I will also be taking legal action against Globes, as I have statements confirming that company officials were aware of the affair and did not take any action. They now face a choice of terminating both individuals involved or confronting a $1 million lawsuit. Kirk is playing golf tomorrow morning, and Janet invited me over to her house around mid-morning. We will have a chance to go over the evidence and see if there is anything we can do. Janet resides at 26 Hemlock Avenue in Crestmont. The next morning, Megan informed me that she would be gone for a couple of hours, so I dropped the kids off at my mom's house and headed to Crestmont. Janet welcomed me at the door, and we entered her den. There was a comfortable leather couch and a large computer monitor displaying an image of an empty motel room. Janet explained that we would be watching her husband play golf live, and she anticipated that I might recognize the caddy accompanying Kirk. She had arranged this for $400, with Kirk covering the expenses. The session was expected to last about 2 hours, and Janet encouraged me to get comfortable. She offered drinks, and I chose a regular soda. Janet shared the information she had collected about the affair, including photos, tapes, and documents. The details left me amazed and crushed, confirming Megan's actions. During our conversation, Janet mentioned having 3 large koi ponds in her backyard. I expressed interest in bringing the children over to see them, and she seemed pleased. Just then, the monitor showed Kirk and Megan entering the room, immediately engaging in physical activities without any small talk. Watching my wife in that situation left me speechless and uncomfortable. I expressed my discomfort to Janet and suggested discontinuing the viewing. She agreed, stating that the entire event was being recorded, which was all we needed for the lawyers. After deciding not to watch any further, Janet suggested showing me her koi ponds instead. I thought it would be more interesting than watching the explicit video. She was delighted by my interest in her hobby, and we walked to the back of the house. As we admired the beautiful fish ponds, Megan reached her climax in the background. Despite the uncomfortable situation, I found solace in spending time with Janet and learning more about her hobby, especially considering my previous experience as a plumber. I offered to help her with the pond maintenance whenever Kirk was playing golf. After a few hours, we returned to the house. The motel room was empty, indicating it was time for me to return home. Janet assured me she would call when Kirk had another golf game so I could spend time with Sarah and Todd. The upcoming weeks proved to be challenging. Every time Megan took a shower, I would discreetly check her bag to find a new stash of contraceptives. I couldn't understand how she managed to use them all. To be prepared, I kept a safety pin on my keychain, ready to puncture them if necessary. I anticipated that Megan might unexpectedly visit her sister. On evenings following Kirk's golf games, the kids would enthusiastically share stories about their visit to the koi lady, eagerly showing Megan the fish drawings they made and the names they gave them. She seemed oblivious to the connection between Kirk's wife and the koi lady, which relieved her as I kept the children entertained during her absence. I made 2 unsuccessful attempts to convince her to quit her job and end her involvement with Kirk. Both times, I faced the same rejection, with the second attempt being particularly bitter. I started making excuses to avoid intimacy with her, and she responded by criticizing my masculinity. It stung, but it helped me justify my actions. Finally, on a Tuesday night, she dropped a bombshell, confessing that she had been feeling extremely stressed lately. Megan suggested taking a few days off work to visit her sister for about a week. She recognized my efforts with the overtime and late nights, and thought it would be a good opportunity for me to relax while she was away. Megan believed that a trip to my sister's would benefit me more than spending a year with a therapist. She encouraged me to enjoy myself and assured me that she would take care of everything. Megan was relieved that I understood the importance of the extra work for the sake of our family, but expressed concern that she may have pushed it too far. That night, I struggled to sleep, consumed by the tasks that awaited me the following day. I was relieved that the moment I had been waiting for had finally arrived. Megan's sister Nancy and her husband Brad lived about 3 hours away. Brad, although somewhat tolerable, could be an idiot, especially when Nancy was in charge. Interestingly, their town had 2 abortion clinics, and I had gathered the information about their names, addresses, and operating hours. I'd even familiarized myself with the terms and conditions of each clinic, including the mandatory 2-day cooling-off period. Assuming Megan's first appointment was on Wednesday, the earliest she could undergo the procedure would be on Friday, giving her a few days to recover before returning home. This provided me with a day and a half to finalize my plans, which seemed feasible. Once Megan embarked on her trip for rest and recuperation, I began making necessary arrangements. I had to open up to my parents about the situation, admitting my failure as a husband. They understood and offered their support. The kids enjoyed their time with my parents, and my dad's truck would be helpful for moving Megan's belongings. The lawyer had all the required paperwork prepared for me on Thursday morning. Janet also had her paperwork ready, and she planned to serve Kirk at the same time I served Megan. The only inner conflict I faced was whether to give Megan one last chance to reconcile. Although it was scarce, my dad and I spent the rest of the day packing Megan's things. On Thursday morning, after a 3-hour drive, I arrived at the first clinic, only to be disappointed. This left me with one more option, the Family Planning Center. Approaching the receptionist with whatever confidence I possessed, I introduced myself as Phil Jenkins and explained that my wife Megan had instructed me to come and sign a consent form. When the receptionist asked for more details about the form, I admitted that I didn't know its exact name, but described it as a document stating my understanding, agreement, and commitment to not pursue legal action. The receptionist verified Megan's identity and mentioned that her sister had already signed on her behalf, but my signature would be preferable. After a brief consultation of the computer, she retrieved the file. I seized the opportunity and signed the form just below Nancy's signature. Upon noticing that the procedure was scheduled for Friday morning at 11 a.m., with the requirement to arrive an hour early, I inquired about any outstanding payments. I took out my checkbook and placed it on the counter. The receptionist assured me that Megan had already paid the full amount of $800 in cash, and there was no further payment due at that time. I expressed my gratitude for her assistance and acknowledged that it made the process much smoother. The reception I received upon arriving at Nancy and Brad's place was overwhelmingly insincere, almost comical. Megan initiated the conversation, surprised by my presence and questioning why I was there. I explained to everyone that my parents wanted to take care of the kids for a few days, so I took some sick leave and decided to visit them. I mentioned that I also needed some time to relax. There was a brief silence in the room, and I could tell that everyone was trying to find a way out of the situation. Nancy signaled Brad to join her in the kitchen, while Megan started engaging in casual conversations. After a few minutes, Brad came back with a suggestion. He proposed that we take the next day off, borrow his friend Jack's boat, and spend the day on the lake to ensure that we wouldn't disturb the ladies. I agreed and mentioned that a day on the lake would help me forget about my worries. I suggested inviting Jack to join us, and Brad agreed to make the arrangements. Everyone seemed relieved with the outcome. We had a quiet dinner that night and spent the rest of the evening chatting about various topics. Unfortunately, we couldn't grow closer that night as Megan didn't want her sister to overhear. Early the next morning, Jack was waiting with the boat, and Brad prepared lunch while stocking the cooler with beer. As we loaded the truck and the boat, Brad asked if I was going to join them. I informed him that I had changed my mind and suggested that he enjoy his day because dealing with Nancy wouldn't be pleasant for the next few hours. Brad tried to persuade me for about 5 minutes until I had to firmly decline. After a couple of heated exchanges, Jack and Brad finally left. I went inside, poured myself some coffee, and turned off Nancy's cell phone. Then I called my dad, who was always up early. We chatted for about 2 hours, ignoring the constant call-waiting tones. Brad must have tried reaching Nancy for hours. As Megan and Nancy woke up, I said goodbye to my father and prepared myself for the upcoming confrontation. I cleared the missed calls on the landline and turned on Nancy's cell phone. In less than 2 hours, Megan and Nancy needed to be at the family planning center. In about 5 minutes, I would have to face 2 angry women. Since I had finished the first pot of coffee, I brewed a new one for my wife and her sister. Megan asked why I was still there, and I explained that I didn't feel like fishing, so I decided to spend the day with them instead. I suggested finding a nice place for lunch together, and mentioned that I had to leave that night, so I didn't want to spend the day on the boat with Brad and Jack. Megan rejected the idea, stating that she and Nancy had their own plans for the day and wanted to go alone. She emphasized that she could spend time with me anytime, but she only got to see Nancy a couple of times a year. Furthermore, she pointed out that I would be there for the rest of the week. I tried to convince Megan, expressing that she could spare me at least half the day since I had traveled all the way to be there. I suggested that she could have the rest of the week for her sisterly activities. Nancy left the room, dialing a number on her cell phone, while Megan sat defeated in a chair. We could hear Nancy yelling at Brad over the phone, as if he had committed a terrible crime. I felt sorry for the guy, but he chose to marry her. Megan told me that they didn't want me to tag along for the day, emphasizing that they had their plans and I wasn't included. I agreed to listen to their plans and decide if I was interested, or if I'd find something else to do with my time. I expressed my confusion, pointing out that they had the whole week and I only had that day. I jokingly asked if they were meeting guys. Megan clarified that they weren't meeting anyone but planned to go shopping for intimate items like bras, underwear, and sexy nightgowns. She explained that they didn't want guys around while they were trying them on. I suggested that most of those shops were in the mall, and I could keep myself occupied with other things while they used the dressing rooms. I offered to tag along without getting in their way and assured them that they wouldn't have to entertain me during lunch. I even promised to take them to a fancy place to make up for the trouble I had caused. At that moment, Nancy stood in the doorway, glaring at me without saying a word. Megan realized that she couldn't reason with me and seemed ready to give up. Both of them were still in their house robes, and eventually, Megan stood up and said that she needed to get dressed before leaving the room. Nancy looked at me and called me a real bonehead before following Megan upstairs. About 20 minutes later, the light on the landline phone illuminated, indicating someone upstairs was making a call. The clock was ticking, and they had an hour to get to the center. I considered my next move if they tried to leave without me, planning to follow them and make sure they knew it. However, I didn't believe they would attempt that. After 20 minutes, both of them came down the stairs. Megan informed me that it was time to go shopping, adding a bit of an attitude. Surprisingly, it was a bit easier than I thought it would be. I speculated that the upstairs phone call was likely to the family planning center, possibly to reschedule the appointment. Since I said I was leaving that night, they probably figured the best way around the problem was to just wait until I left. I wasn't trying to stop Megan from getting the termination, but I wanted to make it more difficult for her. I insisted on taking my car because I wanted to drive. I didn't want them ditching me somewhere a few miles from the house. I pulled into a service station, I filled up the gas tank, checked the oil and water, and cleaned the windshield. It was the most time I ever spent servicing my car. They both just sat fuming. When we arrived at the mall, I parked far out so we'd have a good walk. Once we were in the mall, I pretty much let them alone. I kept an eye on them, but really could care less about what they were doing or buying. They didn't seem to be having any fun. They spent most of the time talking to each other and making gestures. They bought a few things just to show me they had been shopping. I tried to stay hidden but still keep them in sight. There was definitely some serious discussion going on. The time for the appointment passed. I had succeeded in delaying the inevitable. I knew she was still going to get the procedure, so I had no intention of interfering any further. Shortly after noon, they came back to the center court of the mall where I said I would meet them. We went to the Olive Garden for lunch and got back to the house around 2 p.m. There wasn't much conversation during lunch or on the drive home. I was smiling to myself the whole time. I knew these two were upset with me right now, and I didn't care. What a wonderful feeling. I grabbed a beer and relaxed on the sofa. Brad finally arrived, and for about 30 minutes, Nancy verbally berated him. He managed to slip out and disappeared for a couple of hours, returning by supper time. After the girls finished cleaning up, I requested a private conversation with Megan in the kitchen. Nancy sneered, and they both went into the living room. Megan remained upset due to the earlier events, and I sensed she wouldn't be easy to deal with. I got straight to the point, expressing my desire for her to quit her job and stop seeing Kirk Langford. Her teeth clenched tightly, and she struggled to refrain from hitting me. She insisted that she didn't want to hear that again, expressing her frustration with me bringing it up repeatedly. Megan refused to waste her time answering me, stating that I already knew the answer and it wouldn't change. She gave me the ultimatum to either change the topic or leave. I reached into the manila envelope by the chair and pulled out a legal-sized envelope. I explained that I had asked her at least 10 times in the last 2 months, and each time she refused. I presented the divorce papers, suggesting she sign them and mail them in. I mentioned that there was a self-addressed, stamped envelope included, and if she wanted a lawyer to look them over, she was welcome to do so. She glared at me and leaned across the table, expressing frustration. She stated that I couldn't divorce her, just because she wouldn't quit her job or have the friends I wanted her to have. Megan insisted that for a divorce, there needed to be grounds, and I didn't have any. She suggested it was time for me to go home and get my act together. She emphasized that she was my wife and had no intention of giving up her home and family just because I didn't like where she worked. I responded by reaching into my manila envelope and bringing out a stack of photos. I placed 6 pictures of Megan with Kirk on the table and asked if she had lovemaking with him. There was no answer as I placed another 6 pictures of them in various positions on the table. As I continued putting more pictures on the table, she started screaming at me, urging me to stop. I acknowledged her reaction, understanding that she perceived my actions as spying. She criticized me, calling me a sneaky person and expressing disdain for my approach. She questioned why I didn't address the situation directly and accused me of behaving like a pervert, stating that my complaining made her sick. At that moment, my cell phone rang and I answered it, learning that my dad would arrive in 10 minutes with Megan's belongings to Nancy's place. As I hung up, she asked about the call. I informed her that my dad was bringing her stuff to Nancy's place, explaining that the locks had been changed at our house. I offered to retrieve any forgotten items if she let me know. She remained silent as I handed her the title to her car, mentioning that I had signed it over to her. In an envelope, I included half of the money from our bank accounts, approximately $200. I outlined arrangements for her to have visitation rights with the kids once a week, with the possibility of an overnight stay monthly, yet she made a statement attesting to the affair and had it notarized. I added that I had a DVD from the May 10th visit she and Kirk made to the Scandia Motel, which was 2 hours long and captured everything depicted in the pictures. As I collected the photos, I clarified that I hadn't taken any of these. I wasn't concerned about your activities, I just didn't appreciate being deceived. Lastly, I'd like you to have this keepsake from our love. I removed the safety pin from my keychain and slid it across the table. I revealed the pin to Megan, explaining that I had used it to poke holes in all of our contraceptives for the past 2 months. I mentioned that she had used 48 rubbers in the last 2 weeks alone, and Kirk had been more fortunate than I ever dreamed of being. She responded with anger, calling me a miserable weasel and deeming my actions the most despicable thing she had ever heard of. With anger, calling me a miserable weasel and deeming my actions the most despicable thing she had ever heard of. I retorted, stating that the most despicable thing was having an affair with someone outside of our marriage. I acknowledged that I might be considered a fool, but she was a cheating partner. I informed her that I had to run as my dad had just pulled up in the driveway. I noted that she never apologized or expressed remorse for her actions. As I left, I told her goodbye and wished her well with her termination. On Monday, she finally started crying as I left the room. Nancy rushed in to comfort her, and Brad followed me out to the front porch. I challenged him, asking why my wife had come down to visit him and Nancy. Brad looked down at his feet for a few seconds, seemingly thinking. Eventually, he apologized and offered to help me unload the truck. We finished unloading in about 10 minutes while Megan continued crying in the kitchen. I didn't know what she was crying about, and frankly, I didn't care. Kirk and Megan were both fired from Blobies the next week. Megan refused to sign an affidavit. The lawyer said he had a strong enough case without it. I didn't hear from my loving wife at all. After that night, she did not come to see the children. They didn't seem to mind because they were forming a good bond with Janet. We spent a lot of time together as a family. Mostly, there was no lovemaking or even talk of it. We were not going to do anything that might jeopardize the divorces. The kids and I were learning a lot about Koi and having a great time doing it. At last, after 4 months, both divorces were final. Megan never fought hers, but Kirk went down kicking and screaming. He lost the house, all the investments, and ended up having to pay a large monthly alimony payment. A few days before Christmas, Megan came to the house with presents for the kids. I was polite and didn't do anything to ruin the holiday spirit. She stayed for about 2 hours and then left as quietly as she came. Nothing was said between us about the divorce or the affair. I put the house up for sale, and 2 months later we moved in with Janet. Kirk took a job in Omaha and Megan went with him for months. Later, Kirk disappeared and didn't tell her where he was going. Megan moved back in with Nancy after Brad left for a job on the Alaskan pipeline 2 months later. Nancy received divorce papers in the mail. The two sisters are good company for each other. Janet and I are comfortable with each other. She adores the kids and they feel the same way about her. We are planning on getting married in June and spend every moment we can practicing for the honeymoon. Second story. We needed to have a serious conversation, no doubt about that. As I looked up at the woman who had been my wife for more than 2 decades, it was evident that the last few years had changed the dynamics between us. "It's over," she said, her voice strained, almost choking on the words. "Mike and I are no longer together." I nodded, offering my condolences as she stood there, hands nervously twisting together. She went on to share that nearly 3 years had passed since she promised that things would return to normal. I gently probed for the reasons behind the breakup. Gwen, avoiding eye contact, mentioned my growing unhappiness over the past few months. Familiarity had set in, and the magic spark had vanished. The situation struck a familiar chord. I couldn't help but recall a conversation from over 2 years ago, when Gwen had dropped the bombshell about our lovemaking life becoming mundane and her taking a lover, a younger, more vigorous man. She made it clear that she intended to continue the affair, leaving me with an ultimatum: accept it or risk losing her, our home, our kids, and my job working for her father. To top it off, she even threatened me with domestic misuse charges. The memories flooded back and the déjà vu was unsettling. Gwen reminded me that she had previously mentioned that the situation wouldn't last forever. She thanked me for my patience and understanding during that time. I responded with a nonchalant shrug, not offering much to the conversation. She continued, outlining her plans for our future. She suggested that we could return to normal and I could move back into our bedroom whenever I wanted. She even proposed doing so right away, citing her emotional distress over Mike ending their relationship abruptly. Curious about Mike's actions, I inquired about what he had said. Gwen, sobbing, revealed that he had criticized her for aging, stating that she had gained too much weight. He expressed dissatisfaction with being seen with her and mentioned wanting someone younger in his life. I carefully commiserated, avoiding disagreement with Mike's judgment. I expressed reluctance to sleep in our bed again, considering the numerous times it had been used by Gwen and Mike. Gwen insisted that she never had Mike over when I was at home, referring to the times I was at work or away on business in France. She suggested getting rid of the old bed and buying a new one the next day. I sarcastically mentioned that a new bed might be nice, and an awkward silence ensued. Eventually, Gwen enthusiastically promised to make it up to me, acknowledging that we hadn't been carnal for over 2 years. She assured me that things could easily return to how they used to be. I questioned if it could truly be the same, and Gwen, gaining confidence, affirmed that it could. She expressed optimism about us getting back to how things used to be. I questioned whether we could pick up from where we left off, considering the embarrassment I faced in front of our family and friends. I mentioned how I stopped going to the village pub to avoid seeing my friends, knowing that Gwen and Mike frequented it. Gwen apologized, acknowledging that her actions may have been thoughtless. She justified her behavior by stating that everyone knew about her affair with Mike. She hinted that my comparisons of Mike's prowess in bed to mine contributed to the situation. I reminded her of the hurtful comments relayed to me by their friends. She insisted that Mike wasn't better but just different and more exciting than our lovemaking life had become. Despite my understanding, I expressed reluctance to easily return to our bedroom, citing the damage to my male ego. Gwen suggested a weekend trip to Brighton, staying at a familiar hotel, and driving my classic Jaguar XK 140. I commented on the difficulty of returning to our old carnal routine. I shocked her by revealing that I had sold the Jaguar a year ago, highlighting how little attention she had paid to my life. She was taken aback, expressing disbelief that I had sold the beloved car I had spent hours renovating. I informed her that we couldn't buy it back, and she suggested using money from the company or her trust to get another one. I declined, emphasizing that it wasn't for sale and questioning where the money would come from. I informed Gwen that she had signed away the trust money 5 months ago, explaining that the funds were used for our children's house deposits. She seemed surprised and asked if that was where the money came from. I responded, stating that I did inform her, including my decision to sell the Jaguar. I mentioned that she was preoccupied with her affair and the microphone during that time. Gwen inquired about the family company's financial status, and I confirmed that the company was fine but no longer owned by us. She seemed oblivious to the recent paperwork finalizing the deal. Desperate to understand our financial situation, Gwen asked about the sale of the business and whether we were still rich. I let her stew for a while, allowing her to reflect on the changes that occurred while she was engrossed in her affair with Mike. I then revealed that her share from the sale of the business would just about cover the mortgage on the house. Confused, she asked about the mortgage, indicating her detachment from financial matters. I clarified that I had spent my half on a 45-foot sailing yacht, as I had taken early retirement and planned to spend my days sailing the seas. Gwen expressed her dismay, stating her hatred for boats in the sea. I acknowledged her feelings but emphasized that there was no room for her on the boat anyway. She demanded an explanation, wondering why there wasn't enough room for her on such a large boat, seemingly reconsidering her dislike for the sea. I explained to Gwen that the sailboat was designed for just 2 people, including the deckhand I hired recently. Despite this, she insisted that she could still accompany me, suggesting exploring the Mediterranean or sailing to the south of France, reminiscing about the enjoyable time she had there with Mike last year. I interjected, mentioning that there was only 1 cabin on the boat, more or less true. She loudly repeated her surprise about the single cabin and questioned the whereabouts of the deckhand. I revealed that the deckhand was a woman who had been sleeping with me for some time. Upon learning that the deckhand, Giselle, was a 28-year-old French blonde, skilled in boat knowledge, cooking, and passionate in carnal matters, Gwen burst into tears. The next day, I left for France to join my boat and Giselle, leaving Gwen still sobbing. It took some time, but my plan was coming to fruition. I hadn't informed Quinn about the 6-bedroom villa I had purchased nearby, with the money I had saved before selling the company. I looked forward to enjoying the pool and playful moments with Susie, who had a penchant for not wearing the top half of her bikini. I also anticipated the joy of opening the garage doors, where my old Jaguar XK 140 had been sitting alone for too long. It would soon be taking Giselle and me to a familiar French restaurant on the coast. As for Mike, he experienced misfortune when he was mugged outside his favorite bar, suffering injuries including 5 broken ribs, busted kneecaps, and the loss of his purse and one of his testicles. It seemed the tables had turned, marking the end of his happy days.